Well, ahoy, everyone. This is David Perry, and the second of my occasional series, my new online TV show, as I call it, Ahoy, talking with professionals about how we go from the great pause into the great return. Last week, we had a conversation that was very popular with cruise industry expert and maritime historian Bill, Mr. Oceanliner Miller. And today we go from the seas to the skies. Please join me in welcoming David Kliman of the Kliman Group. David, welcome.
Thank you, Ahoy. Pleasure to be here.
So what is that in the background I see?
That is a United Airlines 777 cockpit from United Airlines Zoom background downloads.
Now,
I have actually had the privilege of flying in a simulator in the left seat in this very airplane. Quite a technology wonder.
Yeah, I was going to say, for you, you're more familiar than just Zoom backgrounds with a cockpit of planes. For those who are not familiar with your expertise and hobbies, tell us a little bit about that, and then we'll go into the Kliman Group and our questions.
Well, I am quite obsessed with aviation. I grew up in an aviation family. My father remains to this day a very avid pilot, and I got my pilot's license when I was a teenager and have been flying significantly in a succession of single and twin engine high performance aircraft from the age of about 15 to this day. I've had a great experience a while ago of flying from Santa Rosa, California to Ushuaia, Argentina, and back over about 6 weeks. And I've done many, many long haul airplane trips all over North and South America.
So as I've told friends and colleagues, you are to what flies as I am to what has a deck and a propeller.
That is correct.
So how has COVID impacted your personal flying? Because I know also you've been close to your dad and you both still fly, correct?
Yeah, personal flying not really impacted. The first couple of weeks, it was a little unclear what was what, but general aviation has not really been impacted very much and remains very popular for those privileged to be able to go that way. But certainly commercial aviation, the airline industry, everyone thought 9/11 was a catastrophe, which it was a catastrophe in terms of lives and finance that people thought would never be replicated. But unfortunately, in terms of the financial hit on the airline industry, the catastrophe is still being counted.
And actually, I should have given a little background before I jumped right into my questions. Talk to us about your work with the Kliman Group. What is it you do and who do you advise? And if you can, who are some of your clients?
Sure, of course. I create and facilitate think tanks in the tourism space for hotel companies, destination marketing organizations, have worked with some airlines. So I basically do research in the tourism space, primarily but not exclusively in the meeting and event space, but also in leisure and retail. So I do that through having in-depth conversations with my customers. So I work with from the largest San Francisco Travel, Las Vegas Convention and Visitors Authority, from the largest destination marketing organizations to some of the smallest, Coastal Mississippi, Des Moines, Iowa, Providence, Rhode Island, and about a dozen in between. And then hotel companies like Wynn Encore Las Vegas and Encore Boston. I work with Hyatt very deeply and other tourism organizations like that.
So let's talk about when you first became aware of COVID. And then the second part of that is when you realized that COVID was something unique in our history and something that was going to dramatically affect not only the world, but your business. And how has it affected your business?
Yeah, it has certainly impacted my business tremendously because my clients, the hotel industry and the destination marketing industry, have had a hard stop in terms of their revenues. So that corresponds to me as well. I realized, I would say in early January, I was at PCMA in San Francisco, and we were hearing rumblings.
And what is PCMA?
Professional Convention Management Association.
Mm-hmm.
So Joe D'Alessandro and San Francisco Travel were hosting about 5,500 meeting and event industry professionals in San Francisco. And we heard rumblings from China about what was going on. By the time I attended by the Sundance Film Festival in Silicon Slopes the last week of January in Salt Lake, we were really hearing how this could possibly come to us. But it wasn't really until the beginning of March that the rumblings in North America were evident and that this could have an impact. I believe Northern California very wisely went to shelter in place. Was it March 17th or March 18th?
It was, well, there were two parts. I remember vividly Friday, March 13th. How can you forget Friday the 13th, when President Trump gave what turned out to be a very optimistic appraisal of what was going on.
Correct.
And that Monday, so March 16th, Mayor Breed, the mayor of San Francisco, shut down, and California fell soon thereafter. So Monday, March 16th.
Yeah, and on Saturday, March 14th, my husband and I flew from Phoenix to Santa Rosa commercially on American Airlines, and walking into the Phoenix airport, you could taste it. Something was different. You could just intuitively understand that something had changed. There was a palpable sense of tension, not of in the way of terrorism, but in terms of the unknown. The flight, we were on an Embraer 175 from Phoenix to Santa Rosa, and there were probably 20 people on that airplane. And it just was apparent that something was changing quickly. Once shelter in place went into place in Northern California, slowly the rest of the country followed. And in terms of airline industry, hotel industry, travel and tourism, it was a very abrupt stop. And from an airline point of view, their revenues dropped over 90%, not overnight, but within a very, very short amount of time. And they're crawling back slowly.
So what is the status now of the major carriers here in the United States, or also, if you can speak to European and Asia and Oceania carriers? You said they're crawling back. Are they all crawling back at the same speed? And are some of them never going to get off the ground again?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens. So let's start with the legacy carriers in the United States: American, United, Delta. On Monday of this week, so I think that's June 15th, yesterday, United announced that it was using its frequent flyer program to leverage a $5 billion loan. And what they're hoping to do is have financial liquidity solidly in place. And I'm just looking at some notes. They're expecting to have $17 billion in liquidity from a combination of cashing in on frequent flyer points, the CARES Act, a federal loan act. Currently, they're burning between $40 and $50 million a day. So just think about that, burning through that amount on a daily basis.
How does that compare with what they were burning through pre-COVID?
They were making money pre-COVID.
Of course.
Yeah, they were enormously profitable. Mm-hmm. So I was on a listening call, not a participant, but Scott Kirby, the new CEO of United Airlines, yesterday was on a call that I listened into with many, many other people, and he revealed these numbers. American, very similar, announced a similar program. They're burning through about $40 million a day. Their shares have dropped on the stock exchange many, many double digits. It's very intense. Now, there is some good news, and that is that they are seeing an increase in demand. I've got some numbers here where they were seeing at the low end of this, just several tens of thousands of people flying a day on say United or American. They're hovering over about 100,000 a day. They should have multiples of that. Normally millions of people fly on a daily basis. And to that end, the legacy carriers are responding by adding back their schedules. But I will put this caveat in there, that just because United, American, Delta, whoever it is, adds flights to their schedules does not mean that they will operate, and they will respond in the moment to the crisis. And I am not one to forecast one thing or another, but what I do see happening is a resurgence in COVID cases. And so we're seeing that around the country. If this is a true revival to the peak of the pandemic, the airlines will respond in kind.
So when you say that they're keeping a schedule, does that mean that we may see as consumers more cancellations? For instance, like if they have a schedule and only one person sets up on the flight, are they going to cancel the flight?
Oh, they certainly have the right to do that. This week I'm just looking, United said that its July schedule, they're adding back 140 flights that had been suspended. And that includes both domestic and long haul. They're coming back San Francisco, Tel Aviv, a very lucrative tech connection between those two cities. They're adding back Toronto, Montreal, Calgary, and Vancouver, very lucrative cities. But just because they're adding them back in does not necessarily mean they will ultimately operate.
So talk to me about US to Asia in general and US to Europe in general. What is that going to look like in July and August, the typically heavy tourism months in
Sure.
Europe?
I mean, typically out of San Francisco, Los Angeles, and Seattle, New York, Chicago, Washington, you would have dozens of flights going both across the Pacific and across the Atlantic, multiple of dozens from some cities. Cafes added back San Francisco, Hong Kong, and LA, Hong Kong, and they've announced that they're going to propose to operate those services. EVA is flying LA and San Francisco to Taipei. We do have the issue of the Trump administration putting restrictions on flights in and out of China, out of the People's Republic, so that on Chinese airlines, so on Air China and Hunan and China Southern and others. So we'll see. I mean, you really have to, it is changing quickly as these Boeing and Airbus aircraft fly at the flight levels.
So in the second half of our conversation, talk to me about not so much the economics of what is going on with the airline industry, but the physical, tactile experience of getting on a plane in June or July 2020 versus June or July 2019. What are people right now experiencing in airports, on planes, both as they get on and then as they get off? Because every European country is different. My husband Alfredo is Spanish. Typically, by now, we would have been flying to Spain for a visit with Alfredo's parents for his mother's birthday. Well, that's not going to happen because there's even some restrictions internally on travel in Spain. But when US citizens are allowed to once again travel to Europe, what is that experience going to be like on a long-haul international flight? And what is it like now in the United States domestically on flights?
Yep, think touchless. From the moment you get out at the curb to going to check in, to get your boarding pass, to getting on the airplane, think touchless. So the concept of going to a kiosk to print a bag tag or get a boarding pass, That's not happening. People are encouraged to use their mobile devices as boarding passes. You'll have clear barriers at check-in desks and at boarding gates to separate airline personnel from travelers. TSA, the same. They're not touching boarding passes or mobile devices. The airlines are attempting physical distancing by keeping middle seats open as much as possible, but let's be realistic. They can't do that on every flight, every time. There is a very late-breaking movement that goes into effect, I believe, in 2 days on United and American, where they have changed their policies of previously up to now. It's been a requirement to wear a mask during the boarding process, but not on board the aircraft. To me, that's lunacy. Scientifically proven that wearing a mask saves lives. But as of the 18th of June, I believe is the correct date, American, United, and other domestic airlines will follow a requirement to wear a mask on board, and not doing so will place the passenger on an internal, not a federal, but an internal no-fly list that says this passenger may no longer fly this airline. It's different from the terrorism no-fly list that people may be familiar with. Internationally, the flights are empty, very, very light loads, so there's a lot of physical distancing. You're seeing temperature checks at international airports. You're seeing some airports. Iceland is a very interesting example where they have a very small country, 300,000 people, one international airport. They're going to be doing COVID testing, instant COVID testing upon landing. And if you are non-COVID carrying, if you're negative, they will allow you in. If they don't, if you're not, I'm not sure if they deport you or quarantine you. I'm actually not sure about that.
Interesting. The question has to be asked, why don't we, and I'm not trying to be rhetorical or get into politics, but why don't we have some sort of federal consistent rule? I mean, we have a National Airline Association. Why hasn't the National Association of Pilots or the National Association of Airlines said, every flight you must wear a mask? Every flight you check in, you get a temperature check, yada, yada, yada. Why is that? And will we see that?
From your lips to the travel god's ears. I believe that is what must happen. Politics rules. And why it doesn't happen, I think, is sheer lunacy. We need national policy that demands safety standards on US carriers.
So what are you hearing from your colleagues who are pilots, people who work in the airports, people who work on planes? I mean, you've got a Rolodex and a contact list that is deep and wide and high. What are you hearing?
Yeah, they want it. Most of my pilot friends, I have pilot friends working for Emirates and United and Delta and other carriers. When you sit in the cockpit like this, you're pretty isolated. And while your co-pilot or your pilot next to you is not 6 feet away, they're still reasonably far away, but they realize they're in a tube. Now, all large airplanes have state-of-the-art HEPA filters, which does filter the air to a very, very high degree, but that doesn't stop if somebody's physically distanced. If someone is close by you, you can still transmit, but it is good to have HEPA filters. Most pilots I talk to want safety measures in place.
So in our last 10 minutes, let's talk about how these safety regulations are being implemented now on a day-to-day basis. You said there's some stuff coming up in 2 days.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. United, Delta, American, others, they are disinfecting. They're using state-of-the-art sprays where aircraft are cleaned between every flight, electrostatic sprays, the HIPAA filters. They're really curtailing any physical touch. I mean, imagine where food trays and beverages are passed from a flight attendant to a passenger. All of that is being changed. I saw a photo of a Ziploc bag on United Airlines with a plastic water bottle, some packaged food, a mask, and a disinfectant wipe in a Ziploc bag handed to a traveler. Those are the sort of things. Now, you know, that works when you're on a domestic flight. When you're on a 12 or a 15-hour flight, it's going to be a little different, and they're working, and I know there are standards around that. But using as much of the state-of-the-art disinfectant, physical distancing that can be implemented on a Boeing or an Airbus or in an airport terminal is exactly the route that the airlines are taking.
So for the moment, that lovely first class, business class lounge on the back of the double-decker Emirates flight with the warm nuts and all of that's not going on at the moment.
That certainly, there's no bowls of warm nuts or food put out there. I've not flown since March 14th.
Yep, that was my question.
I have read many reviews and firsthand accounts. Apparently, on the premium long-haul flights that are still operating, and they are few and far between, there is food service, but you know, the flight attendants are wearing gloves and masks and really doing everything to maintain safety standards.
So I know you can't make predictions, and because of your job, you're careful to make them, but your job is also advising clients. So using your years of experience and contacts, when do you see this ending or changing? And will we ever get back to the standing at the bar in the back of the double-decker with my warm nuts and cocktail in hand?
I think it'll happen when we have a vaccine and vaccine adoption is widespread. So I heard Dr. Anthony Fauci on Friday on NPR on a long interview talk about he believes, and I believe him, that we need 70% adoption of the vaccine usage, the herd mentality, to be in a place where we could go back to the post-COVID normal. When that will be, nobody knows. I think to our advantage is, unlike SARS or HIV, AIDS, where you had a few labs working on a solution, you now have the whole world working on a solution. So I'm cautiously optimistic, but I don't know when it will be. But the short long answer to your question is when there is widespread adoption to a vaccine that works.
When will you get on a plane next, domestically and internationally?
I have a flight next month, a quick one that I'm doing out of kind of need. I could drive, but I'm electing to fly. Other than that, I'm not sure. Now, I will say this. I used to fly every week, twice a week, three times a week for work. That's not happening because my industry still is quietly shut down. But when it starts up again, I believe it will be sometime early in 2021, maybe a little later in 2021. That's my prediction.
So between now and then, maybe, I mean, you were flying 5-6 times a month.
Easy. Yeah.
Easily. I've seen the wonderful pictures. They're terrific. But realistically, between now and December 31st, 2020, you think you'll be taking one flight a month or less?
Less. I really do.
And is that because of what is going on with the industry, or because you still are concerned health-wise? I mean, what is your comfort level flying?
I'm concerned health-wise, but the reason I travel for work is to be in front of my clients and in front of others, and that has come to a very hard stop. So yes, people are starting to convene, but they're convening for essential reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not in the scientific medical world where people have to get together for a specific purpose. So I will wait, and I'm concerned somewhat for my personal health, but it's really more that I don't need to fly to Las Vegas or Frankfurt or New York to run a meeting or be at a conference, because none of those are taking place, much to my dissatisfaction, but
Right.
it's realistic that that is taking place.
Right. In our last few minutes, talk to me about some data that you sent to me before this interview about how, and again, it's all in general and things can change in a minute or a second, it seems like, in this period. There were some interesting statistics about how the general public is feeling about getting back to tourism, getting back to flying, their
Yep.
comfort in wanting to get back. Talk to me about some of those stats.
Yeah, absolutely. So just as of yesterday, I have a report from a really great source, Destination Analytics. They're surveying thousands of people frequently. Their data says that 7 out of 10 Americans, 70% of Americans, expect to take one or more leisure trip before the end of the year. Now, the caveat here is that most of it will be road trips.
Mm-hmm.
You will see road trips come back first. The majority of Americans traveling in 2020 want to avoid congested areas. And they want to go to places that they are familiar with, as opposed to go explore new experiences. And the big note here to understand is that people uniformly are concerned about what is called pandemic etiquette behavior, the lack of people wearing masks, this nonsense of people convening in large groups for social activities. That is making people distinctly uncomfortable, because anyone who reads the research knows that that is the route to recurrence of COVID.
Right. Is there anything you'd like to say in closing to a member of the general public, the general flying public, since that's pretty much specific to this conversation, about what they should do or where they should look for good information in the coming months?
Yeah, I would say, first of all, read real data. So go to the CDC, go to trusted medical sites, believe Dr. Fauci and his colleagues, wear a mask. There is no reason when you are in public not to wear a mask. If you're uncomfortable with a piece of linen over your mouth, get a plastic shield and wear that over your head. Protect yourself, protect others. It's a mark of respect and knowledge. It is not a political statement.
Yes, I've been pushing for the last few months something that I believe it was the governor or a representative from North Carolina said, remember the 3 W's, wash your hands a lot, wear a mask when you're out in public, and wait in line 6 feet behind people. David Kliman, always a pleasure. Where can people go to learn more about you and your work?
KlimanGroup.com, KLIMAN.com, KlimanGroup.com, excuse me, or just Google my name, David Kliman, and I come right up. Thank you, David Perry. It's a pleasure talking with you.
Ahoy.
Ahoy.